Stay with me until the very end of this story, because what happened in the final days of this ordeal changed everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and what it truly means to love someone. And before I start, drop a comment and let me know what city you're watching from. I love knowing where my Sophia's Family Stories community is tuning in from. My name is Margaret. I'm 67 years old, and I live in a quiet house on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia. A house I paid for myself, a house I filled with warmth for decades, and a house that, for a few terrible months, felt emptier than I ever thought possible. I want to tell you how I went from being the person my daughter called every single day to the person she publicly called toxic, and what I did the morning I found out. But to understand any of that, I need to take you back, because the devil is always in the details. My husband passed away 11 years ago. Gerald was a good man, steady, quiet, the kind of person who fixed things before you even noticed they were broken. We had one daughter together. Her name is Diane. She was the center of our world, and when Gerald died, she became the center of mine. For the first few years after losing him, Diane and I were close in a way I hadn't expected. She called every morning on her drive to work. She brought my granddaughter, Lily, over on Sundays for dinner. We cooked together. We cried together. I thought grief had made us closer. I thought we understood each other on a level most mothers and daughters never reach. Then she met Kevin. I want to be fair. I want to be honest. Kevin is not an evil man. I've spent a long time making sure I don't paint him that way in my own mind. But Kevin came from a family where money moved quietly between generations, without anyone ever asking questions or setting expectations. His parents helped them, his sister helped them, and then, gradually, I was expected to help them too, not as a choice, but as a given. It started small. A car repair here, a vet bill there. Diane mentioned once, almost in passing, that they were a little short on rent that month because Kevin's freelance work had been slow. I wired the money before she even finished the sentence. Of course I did. That's what mothers do. But then slow became his permanent speed. Over the next 4 years, I calculated, and I did eventually sit down and calculate that I had given Diane and Kevin a total of just over $400,000. That includes the $60,000 I contributed toward the down payment on their home in Alpharetta. That includes the $1,200 a month I sent regularly, which started as just for a few months and stretched into years without a single conversation about when it might stop. That includes Lily's private school tuition, which I was honored to pay truly, but which I later realized they had been counting on so automatically that they never once thanked me for it after the first year. I also watched Lily 5 days a week for 2.5 years, while Diane worked and Kevin worked his sporadic freelance hours. 5 days a week. I picked her up, I fed her, I helped with her homework, I put her to bed on the nights they went out, and they went out often. I didn't mind. I loved it, genuinely. Lily is the brightest part of my life, but I see now that what I mistook for being needed was actually being used. The moment things began to shift, I can pinpoint exactly. It was a Tuesday in October, about 18 months ago. Diane called me, not her usual morning call. This was mid-afternoon, and she told me she and Kevin had found a new preschool program for Lily. Something more structured, she said, with specialists and enrichment activities. It sounded wonderful, and I said so. And then she said casually, almost like she was reading from a list, "We'll need you to cover the tuition for that too." Obviously. I didn't say anything right away. I told her I'd think about it. And for the first time in 4 years, instead of opening my laptop and logging into my bank, I sat with that word. Obviously. As if my sacrifice was so expected, so assumed, that it didn't even warrant a question anymore. It was a statement. A given. I still sent the money, but something had cracked open inside me, and I couldn't close it again. Over the next several months, I started paying attention in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. I noticed that Diane only called when she needed something. I noticed that when I called her just to talk, she was always busy, always distracted, always had somewhere else to be. I noticed that Kevin had stopped acknowledging my help altogether. Not a thank you, not a mention. Once, during a dinner at their house, I overheard him telling a neighbor that they had figured out the private school situation, as though he had solved it himself. I noticed that when I got a bad cold last February and asked Diane if she could bring Lily over to me instead of me driving to pick her up just for 1 week, she sighed loudly and said it would be really inconvenient for the schedule. I had watched that child every weekday for 2.5 years. 1 week of inconvenience was apparently too much to ask. But I still didn't say anything. I kept giving. I kept showing up. I kept telling myself that this was what love looked like, unconditional, no receipt required. Then came April. I had a routine procedure scheduled, nothing dramatic, a minor cardiac thing, something my doctor had been monitoring for years. And she felt it was time to take care of it. I would be in the hospital for 2 nights. I told Diane 3 weeks in advance. I told her which hospital. I told her what day and what time. The night before I went in, she texted me, "Good luck tomorrow, Mom. Let us know how it goes." Not, "I'll be there." Not, "Do you need me to drive you?" Not even a phone call. I had my neighbor Ruth take me to the hospital. Ruth is 71 years old and has a bad hip, and she drove 40 minutes each way to sit with me before the procedure and make sure I had everything I needed. Ruth, who is not my family, I stayed in that hospital for 2 nights. Diane did not visit. Kevin did not visit. On the second day, I received a text from Diane asking whether I had submitted the reimbursement form for Lily's school activity fee, because she needed the money back before the end of the month. I was in a hospital bed, I had wires on my chest, and my daughter was texting me about a reimbursement form. I didn't respond. I lay there looking at the ceiling for a long time, thinking about Gerald and what he would say if he could see this. I think he would have been heartbroken, but I also think he would have told me, quietly and gently as he always did, "Margaret, enough." I came home on a Thursday. Ruth stocked my refrigerator and stayed for lunch. Diane called that evening briefly to ask how I was feeling. And within 4 minutes, the conversation had shifted to Kevin's new business idea and whether I thought it had potential. I said I was tired and needed to rest. That weekend, I was still moving slowly, still sore, still processing everything that had happened. Not just the procedure, but everything I had allowed myself to finally feel. I found myself opening Facebook, which I don't do often, just looking through the quiet scroll of people I went to church with and old friends from before Gerald died. And there it was. Diane had posted something 2 days earlier while I was still in the hospital. A long caption beneath a soft-filtered photo of her and Kevin at what looked like a winery. And in that caption, she wrote about how important it was to protect your peace, how some relationships, even family relationships, could be quietly draining. How she had learned to set boundaries with people who used guilt to keep you close. How freeing it had been, she said, to stop letting other people's emotions control her decisions. The post had 47 likes. Multiple friends had commented things like, "So true," and "You deserve this," and "Good for you." She had written it from a winery. While I was in a hospital bed, having a procedure on my heart, I sat with my coffee going cold in my hand for a very long time. I want to tell you what I felt, because I think you deserve the honest version. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought I would. Instead, what I felt was something quieter and more final, like a door closing. Not slamming, just closing, with a soft, certain click. I called my attorney that Monday morning. His name is Charles, and he has handled my affairs for many years. I told him I needed to make some changes. I told him what I had been giving, and for how long, and I heard a brief silence on his end before he said, very carefully, "Margaret, I'm glad you called. We restructured everything. My will was amended. The arrangements I had informally been making, monthly transfers, tuition coverage, the assumption that I would continue funding their life indefinitely, were formally ended. Charles helped me put a trust in place for Lily, specifically, managed by a third party, accessible to her at 25 and not a day sooner, and not touchable by her parents under any circumstances. Lily will be taken care of. I made sure of that, but Diane and Kevin would no longer have access to my finances. Not directly, not informally, not in any way I hadn't explicitly chosen. Then I did one more thing. I called the bank and removed Diane from the secondary position on my accounts, a convenience access I had given her years ago, in case of emergency. I changed the relevant passwords, and then I sent her a text message. Not a long one. I've learned that long messages in hard situations just give people more words to argue with. Mine said only, "I saw your post. I've made some changes to my finances and my arrangements. I think some space will be good for both of us. Take care of yourself and Lily." Then I turned my phone face down, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and sat on my back porch watching the evening come in over the yard. I slept better that night than I had in years. I want you to understand that. I did not toss and turn. I did not rehearse arguments in my head. I closed my eyes and I slept. The next morning, I woke up to my phone, vibrating on the nightstand. I picked it up and looked at the screen. 14 missed calls from Diane, 6 from Kevin, 2 from a number I didn't recognize. A voicemail. Then another. Then another. By noon, there were more. I listened to the first voicemail from Diane. Her voice was not what I expected. She wasn't yelling, she was crying, and her voice had that tight, high quality that I recognized from when she was a little girl and had done something she knew was wrong. She said she didn't know what had happened, that she didn't understand, that whatever she had done, she was sorry. She said the post wasn't about me. She said she needed to talk to me. I did not call back. Kevin left a voicemail that was more composed and, somehow, more revealing for it. He said they were in a difficult position with some upcoming payments. He said he hoped we could resolve things as a family. He said he was sure this was a misunderstanding. He never once mentioned the hospital. He never once asked how I was feeling after my procedure. In the 4th day, they drove to Savannah. I saw the car pull up from the window. I watched them sit in the driveway for a moment before getting out. When they rang the doorbell, I walked to the door slowly and looked through the peephole. Diane was standing close to Kevin, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes red. Kevin was looking at his phone. I opened the door. Diane started talking immediately. She said the post was not what it looked like. She said she had been having a hard time emotionally and that therapy had encouraged her to write about her feelings, and she hadn't been thinking about timing. She said she loved me. She said she needed me. I let her finish. I didn't interrupt once. That's something I've learned to do in my 67 years, let people finish, because often the most important things come at the end when they've run out of the words they planned. And at the end, after she had said everything she came to say, she mentioned the tuition renewal deadline. She mentioned that their account was short. She mentioned that they had been depending on my help and that things were tight right now. There it was. I said to her calmly, looking her directly in the eyes, "Diane, I love you. I will always love you, but I've been taking care of everyone else's needs for a very long time. And I was in the hospital this month, and you sent me a text about a reimbursement form. I needed to make some changes. Those changes stand." Kevin shifted his weight. Diane looked at the floor. I told them that Lily was taken care of, that I had made certain of that through a trust, and it could not be touched. I told them I hoped they would work toward building a life that didn't depend on me to hold it up. I told them my door was open for a real relationship Sunday, dinners, phone calls, genuine conversation, but I was no longer available to fund a life in which I was considered optional. Kevin nodded tightly and looked away. Diane cried again. She hugged me on the way out, and I hugged her back, because she is still my daughter and that doesn't stop. They drove away. I went back to my porch. The sun was getting low, and the air had that thick golden quality that Savannah evenings do in the spring. I thought about Gerald again. I thought about all the years I had made myself smaller and quieter to keep the peace, to keep the connection, to keep being needed. And I thought, I am 67 years old. I raised a daughter. I buried a husband. I survived grief and loneliness, and a cardiac procedure with a neighbor driving me. Because my family was at a winery, I do not need to keep shrinking. The calls slowed down over the following week. Then they stopped. 3 weeks later, Diane texted me just a short message. No requests, saying she had started seeing a therapist again and that she was thinking about a lot of things. She said she missed me. I said I missed her too, and I meant it. We are not where we were. I don't know if we will get back there, or if what we build going forward will look different than what we had before. I think it probably will. I think that's all right. What I know is this. I spent 4 years pouring myself into people who had stopped seeing me as a person, and the moment I stopped pouring, The moment I stood up quietly and said, "This is enough," that was the moment I started to feel like myself again. If you are watching this and you see yourself in any part of this story, if you have been giving and wondering why you feel invisible, I want you to hear this. Loving someone does not require you to disappear. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to say enough. You are allowed to sleep soundly at any age. Thank you so much for being here with me today. If this story moved you or made you think, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below, tell me what city you're from, and tell me what you took away from this. I read every single one, and I will see you in the next story.